Hello class, we are going to talk about Chapter 9, Knowledge, and in this first part we're going to be talking about categorization. So one of the questions your textbook asks is, why is it difficult to decide if a particular object belongs to a particular category, such as chair? And then we will talk about the other two questions in future videos. So to begin, conceptual knowledge is knowledge that enables us to recognize objects and events. So this is related to memory because we are drawing on our memory to be able to recognize objects and events, and then to make inferences about their properties. So when something is in a category, we can make certain assumptions about that based on our prior experiences with other category members. A concept is a mental representation that we use for cognitive functions. And then finally, categorization here is defined as the process by which things are placed into groups. And we're going to talk about a few different ways in which we categorize objects. So first, why it's useful to have categories. When we are attending to things in our environment and perceiving different things, it helps us to understand individual cases, things that we are seeing in our environment. It also helps us to understand things that we have not previously encountered, and we can organize those things based on what category they might fit in. So categories provide a wealth of general information about an item, and they also allow us to identify special characteristics. So what are the things that an object has that are not general to the category? Here's an example. This is a beautiful cat here, and this cat is maybe something that we are perceiving in our environment. And so just by looking at the cat, we will know certain things. We know that a cat, for instance, likes milk and fish. We know that it catches mice. On that other side there, we know that a cat might sleep a lot. So if we see a cat sleeping on the side of the street, we wouldn't think that's unusual. We also know about the sounds a cat might make. So if a cat is meowing, we can tell by the tone if they are in distress or if it is a friendly meow. And we know that purring happens, so we would not be surprised by that. We also know that cats like to rub up against people, or in some cases, cats could be skittish, so they might be running away. So just seeing the cat cues a lot of different areas of our brain, and it allows us to gather information and organize it. There are different ways to categorize. We're going to talk about three ways. One is using a definitional approach, the other is using a prototype, and the third is using an exemplar, and I'll talk about what those three things are. So if you're just using the definitional approach, it does not work well. So this would be when you categorize something based on whether the object meets the definition of the category. And the reason this is difficult is illustrated in our next slide, which I'll get to in a moment. There may be some resemblance between objects, but it may not exactly fit. So here's a good example. If you were describing a chair as a thing with 4 legs, a back, and 2 arms, none of these chairs would fit that definition. So the first one there does not have 4 legs. It's held up by 2 slabs, if you will. B does not have arms, although it probably is the closest to meeting the chair definition. And then C and D are not at all remotely like a chair with a seat, a back, 4 legs, and 2 arms. So you can see that using the definitional approach would not work here. The prototype approach, on the other hand, shows us what is a typical member of a category. So these are some birds here, and we would be able to identify easily that those 4 things are birds. And therefore, that last photo on the right, we could say that's a very good prototype of a bird. It shares a beak, it has wings, it has two feet that have kind of clawed bottoms, and a long tail. And we are able to see that that is a typical bird. In the prototype approach, then, if you look at that top category, this shows us how close a bird is to meeting that prototype. So a sparrow is the closest. A bat is the furthest from that, even though it is in the category of birds. A penguin, for example, and an owl are both birds, but they are very different from a sparrow. You can also see then, down with category furniture, that a chair and a sofa are very good prototypes of furniture, but a telephone, for example, is not. It's a poor example of furniture. So things that, again, are highly prototypical are going to be, for example, for a bird, it would be a robin, it closely resembles. And then low prototypicality means that something has a low resemblance for that category. There is also a strong relationship between prototypicality and family resemblance. So when there's a lot of overlaps in characteristics, if you think of the birds, the beak, the wings, the tail, the family resemblance is also high. When there's low overlap, there is low family resemblance. And so this is called the typicality effect. We preferentially process things that are highly prototypical. So when we see a robin, we can more easily identify that it is a bird than when we see a penguin, for example. And this was verified in an experiment by Smith et al. In 1974. And you can see that for fruit, for example, an apple was judged to be more prototypical of a fruit than a pomegranate, and the reaction time was lower for things that were highly typical, or highly prototypical, if you will. In this typicality effect, again, the prototypical objects are named more rapidly, and we also have found that they are affected by priming. So this was another experiment by Roche in 1975, and what they did was they primed their participants by telling them they were going to see green. And here it is. So they hear green in their ear, and when a green circle appears, they have to respond. And their reaction time for that darker color green was faster than when it was that lighter mint color green. And that is because we even think of things as their prototype. So when we hear green, we're expecting to see that kind of Kelly green color. And when it is not exactly matching our prototype, then it is not processed as quickly. And then they also use different colors where there would be no response. If they said green and either red or blue showed up, they were to not respond. And this is just another illustration of this, that this woman hears green in her ear. She wants to see that darker color green, but then she sees the lighter color and has trouble responding. And finally, the exemplar approach is rather than a single prototype, the concept would be represented by multiple examples. So there are examples or exemplars of category members. And this is not an average. So when you think of a prototype, you're thinking of an average of those category members. This is a different way of approaching it. So it is similar to the prototype view. The difference is that representation is not abstract. You have specific examples of the category members. And the more similar an exemplar is to a known category member, the faster it will be categorized. So again, that family resemblance effect. So the exemplar approach does explain the typicality effect, and it also takes into account atypical cases. And it deals with variable categories like the chair that we saw. So we are able to identify that if someone can sit on it, perhaps it's a chair. So we can use both. Exemplars work for small categories, and chair is a good example of this. So again, if you're defining chair as something to sit on, rather than exactly what the structure of the chair is, we can use exemplars, and we can say that the rock formation is just as much of a chair as the thing that had two slabs on the side. And then prototypes may work best for larger categories, like birds. We know that prototype looked pretty close when we wanted to imagine a bird. And so those are the three types. It is definitional, prototypical, and exemplars for categorization.